Back in 2017, I published a blog titled Definitive and Totally Unbiased Guide on How to Enter the Toaru Series and Why You Should, that managed to get a lot of positive attention from people curious in the series and longtime fans alike. Since then, I've received a lot of requests to update or remake the blog with information on all the new content that's been made available since then. But I figured, if I was going to remake it, I wanted to put in the effort to make it extra presentable. So that's what I've done. Presenting the Toaru Series flowchart, a manic burst of inspiration comprising about 7 hours of work. I provided a link in the description where you can check it out for yourself. It may be a lot to take in at a glance, but that's why I'm here. Hopefully having some visuals and some guidance will help make this guide a lot easier to follow. Now, while this may look like an incomprehensible mess at a first glance, the goal of this guide is merely to present all of your options on how to experience a story, because there are so many different ways to enjoy the Toaru series. When you break it down, it's going to start getting a lot simpler. But let's say you don't want to sit through my 31-minute video explaining all this, and you just want a quick and dirty guide on what order to watch the anime in. In short, you can either start with Index 1 or Railgun 1 or even Railgun S. Once you've watched Index 1, you can watch Accelerator, or you can go straight to Index 2 and then Index 3. And then after you've watched all of Index and the rest of Railgun, you can watch Railgun T. There you go. You can go watch Toaru now if you want it. But assuming you either want a bit more explanation for this watch order, or you want to mix and match your viewing experience, or perhaps you're even interested in the various novels and manga, then strap in because I'm going to blow this whole thing wide open. Before we get into the guide itself though, I want to provide you guys a brief introduction to the series for those new to Toaru. Doing so will make it a lot easier to explain the different paths the flowchart takes. I'll try my best to keep it brief, but I apologize in advance for any tangents I end up on. So, the Toaru series is a mixed media franchise authored by Kamachi Kazuma, a mad genius who physically cannot stop writing. The story is set in a familiar Earth where each of the world's major religions and spiritual organizations have within them magicians who wield the power of magic to meddle in international affairs in secret. Though this isn't your garden variety of JRPG magic. The magic of the Toaru series is heavily researched and based upon real-world occultism and mysticism. The central principle of how magic works in Toaru is idol theory, the idea that symbolism and representation or imitation of some object can invoke the same properties and attributes of the original. An everyday example of this would be the rituals of baptism and Eucharist in Christianity, using everyday objects, food and drink to invoke the properties of God and Christ. In the context of Toaru, this can be applied to a near infinite number of fantastical applications, such as using runes to summon a giant of fire taking on the likeness of the witch-hunting Pope Innocent VIII, or constructing a magic circle by use of onmyodo, feng shui, and coloured origami representing the 4 cardinal directions and 4 guardian animal gods of Japan, or wielding an obsidian dagger based on the Aztec god that guy, to reflect the light of Venus to destroy anything that light touches. These are just some of the potential applications of magic, and most importantly, anybody can perform magic with enough hard work and effort. That is, with the sole exception of espers, who are unable to perform magic without sustaining grave injury. Developed through a specialised curriculum in a cocktail of unknown drugs over a period of a child's schooling, espers are children who have awakened to unique supernatural powers. These powers seemingly have nothing to do with idol theory or rituals or incantations or life force. All that's required for an esper to manifest their ability is for them to perform the proper calculations in their mind. Some examples of esper abilities include the ability to manipulate the friction coefficients of objects, the power to launch electrons in the ambiguous state between particle and wave and fire them as deadly beams of light, the control over the emotional distance between people, or the ability to implement the principles of string theory to teleport by moving through 11-dimensional space. However, because each esper's powers are unique and will manifest differently, there are many with weak or immeasurable powers, and so it creates a system where the most successful espers often get the most attention and funding, while those who show no results fall through the cracks and are often falling into a life of crime just to survive. The primary setting of the Toaru series takes place within Academy City, an independent and walled-off city-state within the island of Japan with a population of 2.3 million, which produces and contains all of the world's approximately 1.8 million espers, along with many scientific research institutions. It's said that the technology of Academy City is 20 to 30 years ahead of the rest of the world, and it protects the secrets of its technology from leaking to the outside world with an iron grip. But don't let my anti-Academy City propaganda fool you. The city is a scientific utopia for most of the people living in it. As long as you're a mid-level esper, you'll be free to enjoy a fun and relaxing life. Just don't look under the surface, the insidious dark side of the city, and you'll be fine. It's not a capitalist dystopia at all. Oh, and don't bother looking up the name of the founder and board chairman of Academy City, Alistair Crowley, on Wikipedia. He definitely doesn't have any relation to the real-world English occultist of the same name who died in 1947. The tone of the series is quite eclectic and fluid, dancing between super serious political intrigue and crime drama, light-hearted comedy and somewhat questionable fan service, fast-paced, flashy and highly tactical battles, and more than a few powerfully evocative moments that really tug at the heartstrings. The world of Toaru is rife with corruption, but the heart of the series is filled with a warmth and hope that refuses to be extinguished, no matter what horrible things may happen to our protagonists. It's a story that examines what it means to be a hero from every angle. The ideology of a hero, the strength and or power needed to be a hero, how heroes impact and inspire those around them to action, and how heroes can be seen as threats to the status quo and those in power, and how it takes more than special powers to be a hero or villain. So then, let's take a step back from the setting and talk about the franchise. The Toaru series began with a series of light novels titled Toaru Majutsu no Index, or A Certain Magical Index, which began serialization in 2004, and continues to go strong with 3 to 4 new books every year, with a current total of about 50 volumes, not counting side stories, of which there are quite a few. And as if that wasn't enough, the success of the Index light novels saw a spin-off series, Toaru Kagaku no Ryogan, or A Certain Scientific Ryogan, commencing serialization in 2007. Index remains the core series, and follows the life of Kamijo Toma, a level 0 Esper with a mysterious power in his right hand that negates all supernatural phenomena by touching it, regardless of whether it's magic or an Esper power. He meets the girl Index Librorum Prohibitorum, an amnesiac sister on the run from magicians from the Anglican Church, who introduces Toma to the secret world of magic and the political machinations of the world's religious organizations, leading him to become involved in a series of adventures against foes from both the magic and science sides of the world. Later in the series, 2 additional protagonists would be introduced alongside Toma, but we'll get to them later. The Railgun series, meanwhile, focuses on the side character of Index, the life of the 3rd ranked Esper of Academy City, Misaka Mikoto, who has the ability to manipulate electricity and magnetism for a wide variety of potential uses. She attends a prestigious girls' school in Academy City and spends most of her time with a few of her friends, 2 of whom belong to Judgment, a disciplinary organization who conduct peacekeeping in the city. These often lead Mikoto and her friends into the heart of Esper-related crime in Academy City, completely unaware of the world of magic outside of the city. Both Index and Railgun have received different adaptations as well. A manga adaptation of Index started serialization in Monthly Shonen Gangan in 2007. The following year, an anime of Index began broadcasting its first season in 2008, followed by an anime of Railgun in 2009. There's also some other media, but we'll get to them later. So this brings us to the question, where does one start with the Toaru series? Now it's time to bring up my flowchart again. Generally speaking, there's 2 ways you can start. You can either start with Index with the Index arc, or you can start with Railgun with the level upper arc. Both stories occur more or less concurrently at the start of the timeline of the story, so you can really start with either one. Index serves as a great introduction to the multi-layered world of Toaru and throws you right into the action, while Railgun takes a slower approach and focuses more on Academy City and the science side of the world. There's also differences depending on which adaptation you pick. Notably, the Railgun manga is much shorter and more condensed than the Railgun anime, which opted to add a lot of filler and anime original story arcs to reach a full 24 episodes. What you end up with is an anime that feels a lot more fluffy than the rest of Toaru. A lot more girls doing cute things, just relaxing and having a good time in between solving crimes and conspiracies. A lot of people really love the atmosphere of Railgun's first season, but it is a bit of a departure from the general feel of the rest of the series, so I think that's worth keeping in mind when making a decision. At the end of the day, it's up to you. The debate of which series to start with continues to this day, but as someone's consumed all of the story, my personal recommendation is the best to start with the intended beginning of the series and watch or read the Index arc first. As for which medium you choose, that's another topic which requires some further examination. As you might expect, Index is a very wordy light novel series full of inner monologues, lots of dense examination of the workings of magic and sci-fi concepts, and plenty of world building. These are things that get largely trimmed out of the anime adaptation, so what you're left with is a much lighter viewing experience. For some this may be preferable, but if you want to fully immerse yourself in the world and the characters of Toaru, my recommendation is always going to be read the Index light novels over the adaptations. There's also the problem the anime tends to suffer in some places. Some books get as few as 3 or 2 episodes to adapt all of their content, so the anime tends to have a feeling of being rushed and hard to follow at the best of times. There's also the animation problems, which really become apparent in the 3rd season of Index and left many viewers with bad taste in their mouths. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Now let's say you are interested in Toaru, but you don't have the time or the motivation to read through 49 light novels. Another option is to read the manga, which as an adaptation is rarely brought up within the fandom, but I feel deserves a lot more attention and respect. The Index manga notably skips volumes 2 and 4 of the light novel, so you may need to switch to a different medium for those arcs. But since then, they've been adapting every story arc in order as it comes. Though the manga is also slow to produce, and it is still not even halfway through the content of Index Season 3, so I think people tend to overlook it. But I can say with confidence, the Index manga is a vastly superior adaptation of the light novels than the anime is. If you're looking for a way to get the most out of the series while saving many hours of your time, the manga may be the best way to go about it. It goes into a lot more detail than the anime does, due to not being constrained by episode limits, and very rarely even includes some scenes or dialogue not present in the light novel. As for how you can procure all these, almost all Index content up to the end of Old Testament and all Railgun content has been localized and released for purchase in English. You can find the Index and Railgun animes on a variety of streaming platforms depending on your region, with their third seasons available on Funimation and Crunchyroll, dubbed and subbed. You can also purchase them on Blu-ray or on DVD, depending on where you live. The Index light novel manga and the Railgun manga are all available to purchase courtesy of Yen Press, either physically or digitally. However, some of the earlier volumes have been going out of print, so I can only wish you all the best in finding physical copies. Good luck, soldier. So let's say you're pretty adamant that you only want to watch the anime to start with. I do have one other recommendation that has proved successful when I watch a series with a few friends. That being, use Reddit as your viewing companion. Back in 2018, Reddit user Razorhead hosted a rewatch of the first two seasons of Index and Railgun on our anime in preparation for the upcoming Index 3, Railgun T and Accelerator anime. What's that third one? Don't worry about that yet. These included discussion threads for every episode, and at the top of each thread you'd find a number of posts by Razorhead he called Small Facts, which go into detail about everything from the light novels that the anime failed to cover. These posts are super comprehensive and extremely helpful, and really enhance my viewing experience when I watch through the anime again with some friends. If you're interested, a handy collection of all of Razorhead's Small Facts posts can be found at the link in the description. If you're going through the anime without reading the source material, these posts will be an invaluable guide to you. Maybe someday I might end up doing some video summaries of each of the arcs here on my channel, and if I do I might link them in the description too, but for now this is the next best thing. So let's start getting into the flowchart proper. In the video here, I'll be listing the episodes and volumes or chapters each arc is comprised of in the corner of the screen. The first arc of Index is the Index arc. This serves as our basic introduction to Kamijo Toma, the titular Index, as well as the setting of Academy City and the magic science dichotomy, forming the basis for the rest of the story to come. The first arc of Railgun is the level upper arc, which introduces us to Misaka Mikoto's circle of friends and the Judgment Organization, as they investigate a conspiracy involving the city's population of espers and a program that seems to amplify their abilities. If you continue watching the Railgun anime, you'll find two anime original arcs in Big Spider and Poltergeist, which continue the general trend of Mikoto's friends investigating conspiracies in Academy City amidst a daily slice of life content. The Toaru Kagaku no Railgun PSP game also fits in here with the anime continuity, though keep in mind it's very much a side story and its canonicity is disputed. The second arc in Index is the Deep Blood arc, which was skipped in the manga. This arc feels a little bit like a side story at times, but it's still a decent arc that does introduce and flesh out characters and concepts that will remain the story for a long time, so I don't recommend skipping it unless you plan on coming back to it at some point. After Deep Blood, we get to the Sisters arc, which is probably going to raise some question marks for anybody looking at the flowchart. What's unique about this arc is that it's actually received a total of 4 adaptations on top of the original light novel. There's the Index manga and anime, and there's also the Railgun manga and anime, which depict the series of events from a different perspective, since this arc is all about Misaka Mikoto. There is certainly merit to experiencing the light novel first, as it will contain some world-building details that none of the other adaptations do, but I'd like to make the case for the Railgun anime version as the best way to experience this arc. Unlike the Index anime or the first season of Railgun, the Railgun S adaptation of the Sisters arc is of extremely high quality. It has a tiny bit of filler that wasn't in the manga, but for the most part it's a very loyal and comprehensive adaptation. But what's really relevant here is that the Railgun version of the Sisters arc includes a lot more content that wasn't explored in the Index version, as the Railgun version depicts all the events in Mikoto's life that led up to the confrontation with Toma that we see in Index. And I can't stress this enough, this is really, really good content that's worth experiencing, with no compromises made on quality for the anime. When I'm first getting people into the Toaru series through the anime, I always watch the first 9 episodes of Index before jumping through to episode 1 of Railgun S. Despite switching between 2 different series, almost everything that happens in the Index version of this arc is also depicted in Railgun, so it flows really well as a perspective shift. The first episode of Railgun S is technically anime original, but it does a good job of introducing the viewer to Mikoto's daily life before diving into the Sisters arc. arc, so no prior knowledge of the first season of Railgun is required. Of course you can go back and watch the first season of Railgun first if you want, or you can go back to it at any time in the future, and you won't really lose out on anything. There's lots of options available, but I really think episodes 1 to 16 of Railgun S is the best way to experience the Sisters arc, and also just an excellent way to hook new viewers into the appeal of the Toaru series. The Silent Party arc, which follows on in the Railgun anime, is once again anime original, and arguably non-canon, so you can watch it or skip it as you like. But don't rush to Railgun T yet, or you'll get very lost. More on that later. I keep noticing how I switch pronunciation between anime and anime, or something like that. It's like my brain can't decide how to say the word. Just go with it. After the Sisters arc, you have the Angel Fall arc, the second arc that the manga skipped. I don't recommend skipping this arc, as it has a lot of great world building and exploration of how magic works, but the light novel is definitely the best way to experience it in my opinion. The anime really pales in comparison here. Following that is the 3 Stories arc, which as the name implies, contains 3 separate mini-arcs in one book. One of these, the story of Oma, is pretty much unrelated to anything in Toaru and is very easily skippable. In fact, it's actually moved to the first episode of Index Season 2, so they had an extra episode to use elsewhere for the first season. The other 2 stories are pretty important though. The story of Inobara Mitsuki explores the impact Toma's actions are having on the geopolitical stability of the world, while the Last Order story serves to introduce our second protagonist of Index, Accelerator, #1 ranked Esper of Academy City. Speaking of, that's also the name of another Toaru spin-off series, a certain scientific accelerator. Despite being a secondary protagonist in Index, the powers that be saw fit to give Accelerator a spin-off series of his own. This series was originally a manga and was more recently adapted into a 13-episode anime covering the first arc. The Accelerator series takes place directly after the Last Order portion of the 3 Stories arc, so once you've finished this, you're ready to dive into the Accelerator series with the Necromancer arc. It's worth noting though, the Accelerator series is very much a side story with very little impact on the rest of the series. The only lasting legacy it has is the introduction of a few characters that show up later in Railgun, but it's by no means required reading to continue Railgun, so please treat it as a side story it is. Also, the Nectar arc is kind of really bad. So bad that they seem to put a complete halt on the series after it. The Necromancer arc is okay, but it's more about Esther and the Hishigatas than Accelerator. Accelerator is just kind of there to look cool, really. If you want actual character development for Accelerator, you're best off sticking with the Index series. That's where all of it happens. The Accelerator series ends with a final chapter connecting it to the events of the Tree Diagram Remnant arc, which comes a bit later in Index. There's also another short spin-off manga that came out recently, Toaru Kagaku no Dark Matter, which as of right now has yet to see an official English release. It takes place at this point in the timeline, but follows the #2 Esper of Academy City, Kakine Tetuku, giving a small piece of his backstory before he's introduced later in Index. Feel free to read it at any time you want beyond this point. And there's also a non-canon Yonkoma manga that branches off from the timeline at this point called Toaru Idol no Accelerator Sama, that involves a project to turn all of the level 5 Espers into idols, in case you're into that kind of thing. It's not exactly canon, but it's also not exactly not canon either. Check it out if you want a fun read. Now, there's also another story that takes place around this time, a Railgun side story novel, Liberal Arts City, where Mikoto and her friends go on an excursion to an artificial island on the coast of California. Now, I'll call it a side story because SS is literally in the title, but don't be mistaken, this story is surprisingly important to the Railgun continuity. If you haven't read Liberal Arts City, you're going to be a bit confused by the inclusion of a certain character later in Railgun. So if you want to avoid confusion while following the Railgun plot, I recommend checking out at least the Sisters arc, the Liberal Arts City arc, and the Tree Diagram Remnant arc in this order. Regrettably though, it was never adapted into anime or manga, and it hasn't even been officially released in English yet. Up to you if you want to read it or not, but I do highly recommend it. It's also a really great read in general, and I'm hoping they animate it someday. Going back to Index, the story continues with the Kazakiri Hyouka Arc, which is a pretty pivotal story arc for the world building of the Index series and marks the end of the first season of the Index anime. Continuing on, we have the Orsola Aquinas Rescue arc and the start of Index Season 2. This arc sees Toma and company directly involved in the political conflict between the different Christian sects, further developing the political backdrop of the magic side of the world. Around this point in the timeline, there's also a couple of side stories, including the Toaru Majutsu Tokagaku no Ensemble PSP game and 2 Index side story novels, Road to Endymion and Necessary Special Admission Test. Feel free to read these whenever you want, as they are completely optional. Most of these Index side stories are all about fleshing out different characters and concepts on the magic side of the world, for people who love that kind of thing, which I definitely do. After that, in Index we have the Tree Diagram Remnant arc, which is significant on this chart because it's a book focused on Mikoto's friend Kuroko, and further builds on the events of the Sisters arc. If you plan on continuing Railgun, this arc is essential viewing. Otherwise, you may be very confused why Kuriko is in a wheelchair when Railgun continues. Before we move on though, there's also a couple more side stories at this point in the timeline, including the Miracle of Endymion movie. Totally optional, doesn't really have any lingering impact on the rest of the story, but it's a fun watch nonetheless, as most anime movies are. Toaru Majutsu no Index SS Kanzaki, meanwhile, provides more insight into the magic world by following Kanzaki on a number of omissions from Necessarius. This book is noteworthy as it provides the origin story of a character who will return later in the Ichihanaran Festival arc in Index New Testament. Next is where things get a bit contentious, as we have the two Daihasei Festival arcs, one for Index and one for Railgun. Unlike the Sisters arc, these two arcs are largely independent from one another, but they do take place at the same time and they do influence each other in subtle ways. From a timeline point, you could certainly continue to watch or read the Railgun Daihasei Festival arc right now, but personally, I don't recommend it. This arc was written after the conclusion of Index Old Testament, and it's written in such a way that expects the viewer to have knowledge of those events in the story. My personal recommendation here is to read or watch the Index side and come back to this arc of Railgun later, but it's your call. I will say though, the Railgun T anime is superb and some of the best animated Toaru content ever, so it's well worth the wait. Index continues with the La Regina del Mar Adriatico arc. I don't know if I pronounced that right. This one is kind of universally panned by the community and maybe not worth the time to deeply invest in. Basically, Toma pisses off the Roman Catholics by getting involved in their affairs again and trying to save people. Maybe just watch the anime or read the manga for this one, but it's up to you. It is notably the first of many arcs where Toma travels to a different country, which becomes a running theme in later books. The novel Toaru Majutsu no Index SP also roughly takes place around this time and introduces some characters who will become relevant much later in Index. It's very much an optional side story though, so don't feel like it's essential reading, but it's a pretty fun time. Following that is the Academy City Invasion arc, which is largely agreed to be the point where Index starts getting really good, and introduces the broader God's Right Seat saga that the novels will follow until the completion of Old Testament. The anime adaptation is also one of the better arcs of the Index anime, but as always, the light novel and manga are going to have more content, so it's up to you. There's also a short side story that takes place around this point in the timeline as well, Toaru Majutsu no Index New Testament SS. Following after the events of the Invasion arc is the Skill Out Uprising arc, which amusingly wasn't even included as a mainline novel but instead an Index SS novel. Despite the name, this is not a side story. Not even the manga skipped this one. It introduces us to the group named Group, yes, that's its name, as well as our soon-to-be third protagonist of Index, Level 0 best boy Hamazura Shiage, the delinquent with a heart of gold. That said, he won't be a protagonist until 2 books later. This also marks the end of Season 2 of Index, and for many people was where the story ended for 8 years. Yeah, there was a real long gap between Seasons 2 and 3 of Index. As a result, you'll find this is the point when many people started picking up the light novels and have a lot more to say about the story. Though considering the quality of Season 3, it's certainly not a bad place to start reading from either. Following that, with the start of Index Season 3 is the Document of Constantine Arc, where Toma travels to France to fight another member of God's Right Seat. After that is the Battle Royale arc. Now, this arc is very widely critically acclaimed in terms of the light novel and manga, but the anime adaptation was extremely rushed and difficult to follow for most viewers. If you're braving the anime for this arc, do not go in without raised head small facts, I urge you. It also skips many of the amazing scenes with Hamazura, and that's a damn shame considering this is where he rises to protagonist status. I can safely say, however, that the manga adaptation is a fantastic way to experience this arc, and I strongly recommend it over the anime adaptation. Things also get a bit busy around this point in the timeline. This is where the Dream Ranker arc, the second half of Railgun T, broadly takes place. Dream Ranker is largely a prequel to the Battle Royale arc, but it won't make much sense if you haven't read the Battle Royale arc first. So the Battle Royale arc is absolutely recommended reading beforehand. Believe me, there was a lot of confusion on Reddit when this arc aired for people who had never watched Index 3. But again, my personal recommendation is to finish Old Testament of Index first before continuing with Railgun if you want the best experience without any spoilers. Don't worry, we're nearly at the end of Old Testament now. Additionally, there's also another manga series that has been released in English that takes place at this point in the timeline, Astral Body. This is a real gem of a series that follows the life of Hokaze Junko, friend of Shokuho Misaki, and is deeply entwined with Shokuho's past. You could read it at this point, but the story references a lot of events that aren't explored until much later in the series timeline, so I recommend holding off until then if you can. Following this, there's also the new and ongoing Toraru Kagaku no Mental Out manga series, which seems to follow after the events of Astral Body and Dream Ranker. Continuing on from the Dream Ranker arc in Railgun is the Jailbreaker arc, which is the most recent Railgun arc to be published in manga, with the new arc currently in progress. It's unknown how far Railgun will continue to go, but here on out things get a bit more straightforward in terms of the timeline. On the index side we have the Aqua of the Back arc, which is currently being adapted in the manga. Definitely recommend the light novel and manga for this one. The anime is rough. There's also a side story which was released around this time, which contains an anthology of short stories focused on various characters from around the world of Toaru, many of whom are introduced for the first time here. SS2 is an essential reading, but many recommend it if you plan on continuing forward to New Testament. Following that in index, we have the British Royal Family arc, or the British Halloween arc. I like that name a lot better. Come on, everyone should start calling it British Halloween. That's what they call it in story. This is definitely one of the most exciting arcs in the novels, but in the anime it's kinda a bit disappointing. You know the drill. Read the light novels if you can, or if you have to watch the anime, at least use Razorhead's notes. After that is the Dragon arc, which is actually adapted pretty well in the anime, surprisingly. And lastly we have the World War III arc, concluding the Old Testament series and the third season of Index. Around this time, there are a number of side stories released that I've included here on the flowchart as well. This will be the point where I'd say you're okay to go back to Daihasei Festival arc of Railgun and get the most enjoyment out of it before continuing with the rest of Railgun. After that, it's pretty much all light novels. Welcome to New Testament and eventually Genesis Testament. I don't think the flowchart needs much more exploration from here. It's all pretty It's all pretty self-explanatory from here on out. There's a couple of side stories that fit outside of the regular flow of events, and so I threw them into this flowchart based on when they were released. Other than that, the only thing worth noting is the Mental Out arc and the Biohacker novel. Mental Out includes lengthy flashbacks to Misaki Shokuho's past with Toma, which are also a direct sequel to the events in Biohacker. Feel free to read Biohacker whenever you want, as long as it's not too early in the series. For this flowchart, I put a line to indicate the time it was released in case you want to continue the story in release order. Once you've read Biohacker and New Testament 11, the Mental Out arc, you'll have a full grasp on the events that lead up to Astro Buddy, so you'll be primed to read that too. And that's about it. That's my comprehensive guide on how to get into the Toaru series and why you should. Hopefully I explained well enough all the options you have when following this flowchart, enough to make an informed decision and curate a watch-read order that works for you. There are so many options and only a few wrong answers, so why not be creative? Have fun with it, mix and match, and by the time you're done you'll be a Toaru expert yourself. The best part is, with so much optional content, there's almost always more Toaru to enjoy if you want it. It's a banquet, so take your time enjoying it all. So before I wrap up, I'd like to make one last pitch. Why should you invest time in the Toaru series? Yeah, it's got occasionally uncomfortable fan service and sexualization of minors that's kind of weird, and some of the jokes don't always land. But the things that keep me coming back to this franchise are the characters, the world, the ideology of it all. This series is full of so many amazing characters. The protagonists stand tall as some of my favourite characters in any work of fiction, and each go through their own trials that shape who they are. Some like Accelerator, changing dramatically over the course of their journey to where they are today. And the cast of side characters is some of the most insane shit I've ever seen. Just look at this character chart I made. I've lost track of how many characters there are now, but there's hundreds on this chart alone. And despite having so many characters, so many of them feel more than one note. They have depth. Everyone has their own motivations and journeys they're going through. Everyone's the protagonist of their own story. And sometimes characters return when you least expect them to. There's really nothing else quite like it in all the fiction I've experienced. As for the world, I mean, it should be pretty self-evident from my gushing that I love this world. Toaru has some of the most elaborate world building I've ever seen in any work of fiction. It's such a joy watching Kamachi construct it piece by piece in each book until you have this monolithic web of character dynamics where every action has tangible effects on someone else's life trajectory, until you end up with stuff like World War III and the Ichihanaran Festival arcs, where everyone has their own personal motivations and journeys, all combining and clashing against each other, and you understand what drives everyone because you spent time getting to know all these characters over the course of the story. And one thing that's really special is that the world of Toaru keeps evolving, with revolution after revolution that changes the course of Academy City and the geopolitical structure of the entire world. We're still seeing the ripple effects of the Sisters arc impacting events around the world nearly 50 books later. It's really amazing. And not only that, but the magic side is such a delight if you're at all interested in history, anthropology, mythology, folklore, and the esoteric. It's downright incredible how much I've learned from Toaru about the more often overlooked sides of human history, the stories of those who have lived a life steeped in the spiritual. It's a kind of representation of the esoteric that you don't see anywhere else in anime, or even rarely in fiction in general. If you want something that takes magic a little more seriously than Tolkien and Dungeons and Dragons and looks at the historical, mythological roots of magic in a modern day setting, Toaru is such an enormous treat. I've even spoken to spirit workers who have read or watched Toaru and feel more represented in the Toaru series than most other works of fiction. So I think that's saying something pretty incredible. And that's to say nothing of all the hard sci-fi concepts the story comes up with. But the most memorable and exciting moments for me are where science and magic clash. Magicians throwing fireballs and mercenaries hurling grenades fighting together at Pearl Harbor. Espers fighting saints and demons, or high-tech Academy City stealth bombers clashing with Archangel Gabriel high above the skies of Russia. These are just some of the spectacles that you can only find in the Toaru series. And lastly, the ideology. Toaru isn't the deepest philosophical or political work of the 21st century, but it goes quite a lot further than most light novels I've seen in examining what drives us as humans. Behind every crime, there's a human, and that human has a heart, experiences that drove them to the point of committing atrocity. They have their own internal logic they abide by, and Toaru never forgets that. Toma, as a protagonist, is a character that will never forget the heart behind every tragedy, and won't let the villains forget either. Again and again, he'll raise his fist against injustice to fight for a happy ending. But just as well, he'll do so to give his enemies a chance for redemption. With his words in his right hand, he'll break apart their self-constructed prisons of logic that led them into thinking committing atrocities was the only way to move forward. And once they've finished fighting, he'll extend his hand out to them and show them another path. It may sound cliche, but the warmth radiating from the Toaru series in spite of all the tragedy and darkness has always touched my heart, and even helped me a bit in my own life whenever I feel like I'm losing my way. It's a story which preaches that it's okay to be selfish, that it's noble even, but no matter what, you need to be honest with yourself, because the moment you start lying to yourself with false justifications and stray from the path, from your true will, one can only hope a good friend will be there to clench their fist and destroy those illusions, because there's always another way forward. These are just some of the messages Toaru has helped teach me in my time reading it. Also, our fandom has the best man-loving manship of the 21st century, but we'll get to that in another video. For now, I hope this video has been helpful to you, and I look forward to producing more Toaru-focused content for all of you in the future. This is Gumlead Sofalosha, and I lay my pen down for now. They really should turn Liberal Arts City into an anime movie at some point.